What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about ancient warfare. We're not talking about crude rafts or simple fishing boats. These were sophisticated fighting machines, bronze-reinforced warships capable of coordinated fleet maneuvers across hundreds of miles of open sea. Their battles were so fierce, so decisive, that they shaped the destiny of 3 continents. Yet somehow, incredibly, these epic confrontations vanished from history books, buried beneath 3,000 years of sand and silence. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight, carved into temple walls, pressed into clay tablets, scattered across the seafloor in bronze fragments that archaeologists are only now beginning to understand. What they reveal is staggering. The battles of Alashiya weren't just skirmishes between primitive tribes. They were among the first true naval wars in recorded history, featuring tactics so advanced that they wouldn't look out of place in a modern military manual. But here's what makes this discovery absolutely mind-blowing. These battles didn't happen in some forgotten corner of the world. They took place at the crossroads of civilization, where 3 continents meet, where the trade routes that built empires converged. The winners and losers of these ancient sea fights determined which cultures would rise to greatness and which would crumble into dust. The ripple effects of these forgotten conflicts shaped the world we live in today. Before we dive into the blood and bronze of these legendary battles, you need to understand what Alashiya actually was. Because this wasn't just another Bronze Age kingdom, this was a maritime superpower that modern historians are only beginning to appreciate. Picture the year 1350 before Christ. The Mediterranean isn't the tourist destination it is today. It's a dangerous frontier where sea monsters supposedly lurk in the depths and storms can swallow entire fleets without warning. Yet across these treacherous waters, merchants and warriors alike speak of a legendary island kingdom called Alashiya. Its very name carries weight in the courts of pharaohs and the palaces of Hittite kings. The kingdom controlled Cyprus, that crucial island positioned like a cork in a bottle at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. But Alashiya was far more than just a geographical accident. It was the beating heart of Bronze Age commerce, the place where tin from distant Britain met copper from local mines to create the bronze that gave an entire age its name. Without Alashiya's metallurgical expertise, the great civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia would have ground to a halt. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of staggering wealth and sophistication. At Enkomi, the capital city that archaeologists believe was Alashiya's crown jewel, excavations have uncovered something extraordinary. Massive copper ingots shaped like oxides, each weighing 75 pounds, stacked in warehouses like ancient Fort Knox. Bronze figurines of gods standing triumphantly on miniature versions of these same ingots. Workshop after workshop, filled with the tools and raw materials of an industrial revolution that happened 3 millennia before the one we learned about in school. But what truly sets Alashiya apart from other Bronze Age kingdoms is revealed in diplomatic correspondence that survived in the Egyptian archives. These aren't messages from a vassal state begging for protection. They're negotiations between equals. The king of Alashiya addresses the pharaoh of Egypt as his brother, a term reserved only for the most powerful rulers of the ancient world. In one letter, the Alashiyan king casually mentions sending 500 talents of copper to Egypt. That's over 12 tons of metal, more than many entire kingdoms could produce in a year. The letters reveal something else crucial. Alashiya wasn't just rich, it was diplomatically savvy, playing the great powers against each other while maintaining its independence through a combination of economic leverage and military strength. When the pharaoh requested more copper, Alashiya's king would politely explain why the shipment was delayed, then ask for silver and ivory in return. When Hittite armies threatened from the north, Alashiyan diplomats would remind everyone how much the Mediterranean trade routes depended on their cooperation. This diplomatic dance worked for centuries. Alashiya grew rich and powerful while empires rose and fell around it. Its ships carried more than just copper and tin. They transported ideas, technologies, and cultural innovations across the known world. Alashiyan merchants could be found in Egyptian ports, Mesopotamian markets, and Aegean harbors. Their influence stretched from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the shores of the Black Sea. Yet behind this facade of peaceful commerce lay something far more sinister. Alashiya's wealth made it a target. Its strategic position made it a prize worth fighting for, and its growing power made it a threat that the established empires couldn't ignore forever. The first signs of trouble came from an unexpected direction. Pirates calling themselves the Lukka began raiding Alashiyan shipping lanes. At first, these attacks seemed like simple banditry, the kind of maritime crime that plagued ancient sea routes. But intelligence reaching the royal court at Enkomi suggested something far more organized. The raiders weren't just stealing cargo, they were systematically targeting Alashiyan vessels, studying their construction, learning their routes, mapping their defenses. Behind these pirate attacks lay a darker conspiracy. The Hittite Empire, master of Anatolia and rival to Egypt for dominance of the Near East, had been watching Alashiya's rise with growing alarm. The island kingdom's independence was becoming inconvenient. Its wealth was funding rival factions in Hittite politics. Its trade networks were bypassing Hittite-controlled ports, costing the empire millions in customs revenue. More importantly, Alashiya's naval power was beginning to challenge Hittite supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean. Intelligence reports spoke of new shipyards under construction along the Cypriot coast, of bronze smiths working day and night to produce weapons and armor for an expanding fleet, of foreign advisors arriving to train Alashiyan crews in advanced naval tactics. The Hittite great king, Tudhaliya IV, faced a strategic dilemma that would be familiar to military planners throughout history: allow a potential rival to continue growing stronger, or strike while victory was still achievable. The decision, when it finally came, would unleash a series of naval battles unlike anything the ancient world had ever witnessed. But the Hittites weren't the only ones watching Alashiya's rise with concern. Across the Mediterranean, in the palaces of Mycenaean Greece and the courts of Egyptian nobles, similar conversations were taking place. The balance of power that had maintained relative peace for generations was shifting. Alashiya's fleets were becoming too powerful, its influence too widespread, its independence too threatening to the established order. What happened next would determine not just the fate of one island kingdom, but the future of civilization itself. The stage was set for the first great naval wars in recorded history. Bronze Age superpowers were about to clash in battles so fierce that the very sea would burn. The bronze foundries of Enkomi worked through the night, their fires casting dancing shadows across the harbor where Alashiya's war fleet lay anchored. Shipwrights hammered bronze plates onto wooden hulls while weaponsmiths forged the long-hafted spears that would bristle from every deck. The king's admirals knew what was coming. Hittite spies had been spotted in the markets, asking too many questions about ship construction and harbor defenses. Foreign merchants reported unusual military activity along the Anatolian coast. The great storm was gathering, and Alashiya would meet it with bronze and fire. The warships themselves were marvels of Bronze Age engineering that would have impressed naval architects 2 millennia later. Unlike the merchant vessels that carried copper ingots to distant ports, these fighting ships were built for one purpose only: speed and destruction. Their bronze-reinforced rams could punch through enemy hulls like daggers through leather. Their decks bristled with archers and marines armed with weapons that gleamed like captured sunlight. Each vessel carried a crew of 50 to 80 warriors, men trained from childhood in the deadly art of naval combat. They knew how to coordinate rowing patterns that could turn a heavy warship on its axis in seconds. They understood the precise angle needed to drive a ram home without getting their own ship trapped in the wreckage. Most importantly, they had mastered the use of fire as a weapon, carrying clay pots filled with burning pitch that could turn an enemy vessel into a floating funeral pyre. The Alashiyan fleet operated with a sophistication that wouldn't be seen again until the classical age of Greece and Rome. Scout ships ranged far ahead of the main battle line, using smoke signals and bronze mirrors to flash messages across vast distances. Supply vessels shadowed the war fleet, carrying fresh water, food, and replacement weapons. Specialized fire ships, loaded with combustible materials, waited to be unleashed against enemy formations at the crucial moment. But technology alone wouldn't determine the outcome of the coming battles. The real advantage lay in experience. Alashiyan crews had been fighting pirates and protecting trade routes for generations. They knew every current, every wind pattern, every hidden reef in the eastern Mediterranean. Their captains had learned their craft not in peaceful exercises, but in brutal encounters with sea raiders who showed no mercy to the defeated. This expertise would be tested against an enemy unlike any they had faced before. The Hittite Empire wasn't some collection of disorganized pirates. It was a military machine that had conquered half of Anatolia through superior discipline, advanced metallurgy, and ruthless efficiency. When Hittite forces decided to move against Alashiya, they would bring tactics refined through centuries of warfare against Egypt, Assyria, and a dozen other powerful enemies. The first Hittite expedition launched in the spring of 1275 before Christ. Intelligence reached Enkomi just days before the enemy fleet appeared on the horizon. 70 ships, each packed with elite troops and commanded by officers who had never known defeat. At their head sailed the flagship of Prince Arnawanda, son of the great king and heir to the Hittite throne. This wasn't just a military expedition. It was a royal crusade to crush Alashiyan independence once and for all. The battle that followed would be remembered as the Clash of Bronze Rams. Alashiyan scouts had tracked the Hittite fleet for 2 days, watching their formations, studying their tactics, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the enemy ships rounded the headland protecting Enkomi's harbor, they found not a cowering merchant port, but a bronze wall of war galleys stretched across their path. What happened next defied every expectation both sides had about naval combat. Instead of the chaotic melee that usually characterized ancient sea battles, the two fleets engaged in a deadly dance of precision and timing. Alashiyan captains used their superior knowledge of local waters to force the Hittites into shallow areas where their heavier ships couldn't maneuver effectively. Hittite commanders responded with disciplined formations that had never failed them on land, only to discover that the sea followed different rules. The bronze rams that both sides had counted on as decisive weapons proved less effective than anyone anticipated. Ships built to withstand ramming attacks absorbed tremendous punishment before finally succumbing. Crews learned to turn aside at the last moment, deflecting killing blows and counter-attacking while their enemies struggled to extract themselves from failed ramming attempts. The real carnage came from archers firing down into crowded decks and marines boarding disabled vessels with swords and axes. Fire changed everything. The Alashiyans had spent years perfecting incendiary weapons that could turn seawater itself into a weapon. Clay vessels filled with pitch and sulfur exploded against enemy hulls, spreading flames that no amount of seawater could extinguish. Hittite warriors, trapped aboard burning ships with no way to retreat, faced a choice between drowning and burning. Many chose the sea. By sunset, the waters around Enkomi were littered with debris from both fleets. Broken oars floated alongside bronze weapons and the bodies of warriors from two great civilizations. The Hittites had been repelled, but at enormous cost. Alashiyan losses were so severe that the kingdom's naval strength was crippled for years to come. Prince Arnawanda himself had barely escaped with his life, his flagship a smoking wreck on the beach where it had been driven by desperate survivors. Yet this was only the beginning. The defeat at Enkomi had humiliated the Hittite Empire in the eyes of the ancient world. Vassal states began questioning their loyalty. Trade partners started negotiating with Alashiya instead of Hittite-controlled ports. Most dangerously, Egypt began making overtures to the island kingdom, sensing an opportunity to gain a powerful ally against their northern rivals. The Hittite response was swift and merciless. Within months of the first defeat, shipyards throughout Anatolia were working around the clock to construct a new fleet. This time there would be no mistakes. The second expedition would be led by the great king himself, and it would not return until Alashiya lay in ruins. Meanwhile, in the workshops of Enkomi, Alashiyan craftsmen worked frantically to repair their shattered fleet. New tactics were developed, incorporating lessons learned in blood during the first battle. Coastal fortifications were strengthened. Alliances were forged with other maritime powers who feared Hittite expansion into their own territories. The island kingdom prepared for a siege that would test every aspect of their naval supremacy. The stage was set for an even greater confrontation, one that would determine not just the fate of Alashiya, but the future of naval warfare itself. The second Hittite armada that assembled in the harbors of Anatolia dwarfed anything the ancient world had ever witnessed. Great King Tudhaliya IV had learned from his son's defeat, and this time he was taking no chances. Over 100 warships stretched across the horizon, their bronze-reinforced hulls gleaming like scales on some primordial sea beast. These weren't just ships, they were floating fortresses, packed with the finest warriors the empire could muster. But numbers alone wouldn't guarantee victory. The Hittites had spent months analyzing every detail of the first battle, interrogating survivors, studying captured Alashiyan weapons, even hiring foreign naval experts to advise their commanders. What they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about fighting at sea. The secret lay in coordination. While land battles could be won through individual heroics and superior weapons, naval combat demanded something far more sophisticated. Ships had to move as one organism, their crews breathing in perfect unison, their captains thinking with a single mind. The Alashiyans had mastered this art through generations of practice. The Hittites would have to learn it in a matter of months. Training began immediately. In sheltered bays along the Anatolian coast, Hittite crews practiced maneuvers that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. Ships learned to wheel in formation like cavalry units, to concentrate their attack on single targets, to disengage and regroup when battles turned against them. Most importantly, they developed new tactics for dealing with Alashiyan fire weapons. The solution was both elegant and brutal. Instead of trying to avoid the incendiary attacks, Hittite ships would charge straight through them. Bronze shields mounted on their prows would deflect most of the burning pitch, while deck crews armed with buckets of sand would smother any flames that took hold. The key was speed and momentum. Get close enough, fast enough, and even the most devastating fire weapons became useless. Meanwhile, Alashiyan intelligence networks were reporting disturbing developments across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hittite fleet wasn't the only threat gathering on the horizon. Mysterious ships flying unknown banners had been spotted throughout the Aegean, their crews speaking languages no one recognized. Refugees from distant shores brought tales of cities burned, of entire populations fleeing before some unstoppable maritime force. These weren't random pirate raids. The reports described organized fleets moving with military precision, coordinating their attacks across hundreds of miles of coastline. Whoever these sea raiders were, they possessed naval capabilities that rivaled even Alashiya's legendary fleets. More ominously, intelligence suggested they were moving steadily eastward, toward the very heart of Mediterranean civilization. The implications were staggering. If these mysterious invaders reached Cypriot waters while the Hittite fleet was still engaged with Alashiyan forces, both sides could find themselves caught in a three-way battle that would determine the fate of the entire region. The ancient balance of power was collapsing, and new players were entering the game with rules no one understood. King Tudhaliya faced a strategic nightmare that would challenge even modern military planners. Launch his fleet immediately and risk facing the Alashiyans while still unprepared, or delay the attack and potentially face both enemies simultaneously. The decision would shape the destiny of his empire and determine whether Hittite power would expand across the Mediterranean or crumble beneath the waves. The choice came down to intelligence reports from his most trusted spies. The mysterious sea raiders were still months away from Cypriot waters, but Alashiyan naval strength was recovering faster than anyone had anticipated. New ships were sliding down the ways at Enkomi almost weekly, while foreign advisors continued arriving to train their crews in advanced combat techniques. Every day of delay made the coming battle more difficult. On a cold morning in early spring, 1268 before Christ, the order finally came. Signal fires blazed from hilltop to hilltop across Anatolia as the greatest fleet in Hittite history prepared to sail. This time, there would be no mercy, no negotiation, no opportunity for Alashiya to recover from defeat. The island kingdom would be crushed so thoroughly that its very memory would be erased from history. The Alashiyan response revealed just how much their naval capabilities had evolved since the first battle. Instead of waiting passively for the enemy to arrive, their fleets launched preemptive strikes against Hittite supply lines. Fast raiders appeared off the Anatolian coast like ghosts, striking at dawn and vanishing before defenders could respond. Merchant vessels carrying food and weapons to the Hittite fleet found themselves under attack by bronze-hulled warships that seemed to materialize from empty seas. These weren't desperate defensive measures. They were the opening moves in a sophisticated naval strategy that would have impressed admirals 2 millennia later. Alashiyan commanders understood that they couldn't match Hittite numbers in a direct confrontation. Instead, they would use mobility and superior seamanship to fragment the enemy fleet, forcing them to fight a dozen small battles instead of one decisive engagement. The tactic worked brilliantly at first. Hittite supply convoys began requiring massive escorts that drained combat strength from the main fleet. Morale plummeted as crews went on half rations, while their enemies seemed to strike at will. Worst of all, the delays were eating into the campaign season, bringing the mysterious sea raiders ever closer to the theater of operations. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. A captured Alashiyan ship revealed modifications that Hittite naval architects had never imagined. Bronze plates weren't just arm the ship's structure, making vessels bothering the hull. They were integrated into stronger and lighter. More importantly, the design included innovations that dramatically improved maneuverability, allowing Alashiyan ships to turn and accelerate faster than anything the Hittites possessed. The implications were clear. Unless something changed dramatically, the second battle would end the same way as the first. Hittite numbers would mean nothing if individual ships couldn't compete with their Alashiyan counterparts. The empire's naval supremacy, built through decades of careful planning and enormous expense, was about to be shattered by superior Bronze Age technology. But great King Tudhaliya had one final card to play. Deep in the archives of the Hittite capital lay tablets describing naval tactics used by the empire's earliest enemies. Ancient techniques that had been abandoned as primitive were suddenly relevant again. If Hittite ships couldn't outmaneuver their opponents, they would overwhelm them through sheer coordinated mass. The formation that emerged from these studies was unprecedented in naval warfare. Instead of fighting as individual ships, the entire Hittite fleet would move as a single organism. Vessels would be lashed together with bronze cables, creating floating platforms that could support coordinated attacks by hundreds of warriors simultaneously. Ramming would be abandoned in favor of boarding actions on a scale never before attempted. The risks were enormous. If the formation broke apart under attack, the entire fleet could be destroyed in minutes. If Alashiyan fire weapons found their mark, the flames could spread through the entire connected mass faster than crews could respond. But if the tactic worked, it would negate every advantage Alashiyan ships possessed through superior individual performance. As summer approached and the decisive battle drew near, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would reshape the ancient world. In the workshops of Enkomi, bronze smiths worked through the night forging weapons for a final desperate defense. Along the Anatolian coast, Hittite crews practiced formations that would either secure their empire's dominance or destroy their fleet entirely. Neither side knew that far to the west, across the wine-dark waters of the Aegean, other fleets were already moving. The mysterious sea raiders that intelligence reports had tracked for months were no longer distant threats. They were closing rapidly on the eastern Mediterranean, bringing with them technologies and tactics that would make both Hittite and Alashiyan naval innovations seem primitive by comparison. The convergence of these three forces would create the perfect storm that historians now call the Bronze Age collapse. But for the warriors preparing for battle in Cypriot waters, the future remained unwritten. All they knew was that the greatest naval war in history was about to begin, and only one civilization would survive to tell the tale. The morning of the second great battle dawned clear and windless. The sea stretched like polished bronze beneath a cloudless sky. Alashiyan lookouts posted on the heights above Enkomi were the first to spot them, a dark line on the horizon that gradually resolved into the most terrifying sight any ancient mariner could imagine. The entire Hittite fleet, advancing in perfect formation, their bronze-tipped rams cutting through the water like the teeth of some colossal predator. What followed would be remembered as the Battle of the Bronze Sea, a confrontation so violent that the very waters seemed to boil with blood and fire. The echoes of that final battle still ripple through time, though most have forgotten how to hear them. When the smoke cleared over those blood-darkened waters, more than ships had been lost. An entire way of life, a Bronze Age maritime civilization that had ruled the Mediterranean for centuries, vanished beneath the waves. The Hittite victory was complete, but it would prove hollow. Within decades, their own empire would crumble as those mysterious sea raiders finally arrived, sweeping away the last remnants of Bronze Age naval power. Today, marine archaeologists diving off the coast of Cyprus occasionally find traces of what once was. Bronze spear points embedded in ancient wood, fragments of hull plating that still bear the scorch marks of weapons that turned seawater into flame. Clay tablets pressed with the final desperate messages of a kingdom facing annihilation. These scattered remnants are all that survive of fleets that once made pharaohs tremble. But perhaps that's fitting. The greatest naval powers in history often leave the smallest traces. Their victories were written in wind and wave, their defeats swallowed by depths that keep their secrets well. The Lost Fleets of Alashiya remind us that even the mightiest civilizations are only temporary tenants on this ancient sea. Their bronze-hulled warships may be gone, but the courage of those who sailed them into impossible battles still echoes in every wave that breaks against the shores of Cyprus. The next time you see the Mediterranean stretching endlessly toward the horizon, remember that beneath those peaceful waters lie the bones of warriors who fought for empires whose very names have been erased from memory. Their battles shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to understand.